Welcome to Prime Video's Behind the Music. Today we're taking a look at the meteoric rise and abrupt end to one of the most popular bands of all time. From nobodies to sellout crowds, we examine the ups and downs of Daisy Jones and the Six, the singer-songwriters who were like family and fought like it. This is the story behind the music. In 1977, Daisy Jones and the Six were on top of the world. Fronted by two charismatic lead singers, the band had risen from obscurity to fame. And then, after a sold-out show at Chicago's Soldier Field, they called it quits. Now, decades later, the band members finally agreed to reveal the truth. This is the story of how an iconic band imploded at the height of its powers. So Prime Video is releasing this pseudo-docudrama series over the course of 4 weeks. Now, there are 10 episodes total, so there's going to be 3 episodes dropping the first week, 3 the next, and then 2 each of the following 2 weeks. Now, the series stars Sam Claflin and Riley Keough, and although it did take a bit for me to really get into the heart of the story, this turns out to be a very riveting character drama. Keough plays the singer-songwriter Daisy Jones, who is talented but hasn't really found her sound or groove. She's reluctantly paired up with an existing band, and that's when the sparks fly. But also, that's when the hits are created. This is based on a novel that is then very loosely based on the story of Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham and what their volatile relationship did to Fleetwood Mac. Now, there are some similarities to the storylines, but this is very much a fictionalized account of a band's rise and fall and everything that went on in between. The writing for the series is engaging, and it's doled out in a way that didn't capture me immediately, but continued to gradually envelop me until I couldn't keep myself from watching another episode. The drama is high, especially as the band members exchange verbal blows, which is all then fueled by drugs, alcohol, and fame. The cast dynamics, they're really well captured and told. And then going back to the behind the music reference that I did in the intro, this series showcases interviews with the band members sometime in the future where everything they talk about and reminisce about is then shown through flashbacks. And these constitute the majority of the show. The interviews are actually just a very small part of the storytelling, but they add a good air of mystique to the narrative. I mean, we can see that things are drastically different, and the way that they all tell the tales shows that a lot has transpired, but what exactly went down isn't immediately told or shown to us. Because all the flashback story parts take place in the 70s, the costume designs and aesthetics are utilized to transport us back to that era. From the clothes to the cars and, of course, the music that plays in the background. I mean, even the earth tones that are prevalent through the majority of the visuals, they all help to feel like we're in the 70s watching these events transpire. The series does take its time in developing the story, with each episode titled as a track on an album. And by the time the band has formed and is gaining success, the progression feels natural, and we've had ample opportunity to become invested in all of the characters. And there is a ton of development on them, building out a storyline that we can connect with. And because of the variety of characters that we meet, there's some comedy, sadness, romance that's all part of the drama. Now, there is one character who has important influence in Keough's Daisy's character, but there are portions of her storyline that take a huge front row presence, and this sometimes feels like an unnecessary tangent and inclusion, creating more of a sense of filler than anything. Now, that's not to detract from the performance. Nabia Bey plays Simone Jackson, and her dynamic with Daisy is very impactful and poignant at times. But when the story chooses to focus more on her career in New York, which is pretty much devoid of Daisy Jones or the Six's storylines, this is when the show feels like it's inserting content that's not wholly relevant. Now, I think Simone's life could have been its own series, because it's just rich with commentary and struggle. But for this series, we get more of her story than I think is necessary. Sam Claflin is wonderful in his lead role of Billy, going toe-to-toe with Daisy and creating an antagonistic and explosive dynamic. And there's a believable passion that exists between the characters, and the emotion is palpable in the way that they execute their scenes. I really enjoyed the whole cast, and while not all of them get a ton of screen time, their inclusion was still important in filling out the context for what went on with the band. Now, there are 10 episodes. They're each about 45-ish minutes, with that final episode being a little bit over an hour. And the time, it's used pretty efficiently, save for some of the storylines that I had mentioned earlier that feel like filler. Now, the drama is always present, and while sometimes I think it's turned up more than it needs to be in order to just create big emotions, there's an urgency that begins to build within the story. And not that there's some ticking clock that the characters are working against, but it's the emotional explosivity and volatility of the relationships that feel like they're approaching a breaking point. This is a really well-filmed series, taking advantage of the time period to utilize some specific aesthetics that really enhance the mood of what we see. There are times when characters will use handheld movie cameras, and we get to watch the footage play out, giving a very grainy and home movie vibe that just only goes to reinforce the grassroots beginning of the band. Now, because this does center around a band, there's a ton of music that's featured within the show, and it is infectious to say the least. I don't know if the actors were the ones to really sing, but even if they weren't, the songs we get as part of the soundtrack are just wonderful, and they really help to make the show. Now, there are a few times where we get to hear full songs played out, and while this is great for context, sometimes we're hearing songs played in their entirety more than once, and that does tend to get a tiny bit old. But something that I found really enjoyable was watching the songwriting process between Claflin and Keough's characters. We watched them build harmonies and riffs, argue over lyrics, and then stumble through choruses until they land on the sound that they want, which then culminates in at least part of the song being sung in the studio as a reward to the audience after watching the whole process. Now, I think that because this is character driven and it's not hugely action oriented, it may take just a bit to get invested in the story. The cast is charismatic and they create awesome performances, but it may be frustrating to only get to see a few episodes each week. I was fortunate to have access to all of it, so watching from a binge perspective became a very rewarding experience. Now, I do think there is enough in each episode to warrant watching as they release. But if you're finding yourself too impatient to only see a few at a time, wait a week and then binge a ton of them all at once. So overall, Daisy Jones and the Six is an enthralling story that focuses on the music of a successful band, but doesn't get so distracted by the music that it forgets to examine the members that make the musical journey so exciting and dramatic. Even though this is a fictional take, the drama feels real and believable, using real examples from the musical world to build out a narrative that's compelling and heartbreaking. The cast shine in their performances, creating characters that are extremely flawed, but also understandable, sympathetic, and cheerworthy. And when all of this is combined with a spectacular soundtrack, the total experience is awesome and definitely worth the watch. There's sex, nudity, a lot of profanity, and some violence. I give Daisy Jones and the Six 4.5 out of 5 couches. So do you enjoy character dramas? Are there any that are just your favorite that you can recommend to me? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.